allows them to inflate this sense of we were important once and we can be important again through the Commonwealth, which is economic absurdity. There's no way that we can do anything like replacing our trade with Europe with the Commonwealth. And the other thing to remember is that Britain has had a long-term structural trade deficit. We haven't really fixed our trade strategy since we lost the empire. Our trade strategy used to be we'd go to other countries, kill black people and steal their stuff. And since the Second World War, when that's been a bit more frowned upon and we've had less capacity to do that, and we've gradually lost those colonies since then, we've not replaced it with anything. And so we've got a long-running trade deficit. And all we've done is inflate the price of our assets, mostly houses, which is why we have this, absurd house price spiral in Britain, and then flog them off to the world. And, we're going through a process of asset stripping the country. Germany hasn't seen its house prices go up for 40 years. And Britain, we have this, particularly London, a huge inflation of prices, because that's all we have to sell to the world to stop our economy collapsing. And of course, that isn't a strategy that can go on. We're just asset stripping the country.
I always loved the fact that one of the excuses they gave for the empire was, well, we built the railways in all these countries, and you think, well, yeah, only to speed up the process of exploiting them.
Absolutely. So, one of my favourite stats, and I'll probably get the detail of this wrong, so apologies, don't. It's not like you're recording this or anything anyway, so it's fine. But is that if you look at the length of the road network in African countries in 1910 versus 2010, there's an inverse correlation. So the more a country was colonised in 1910, and therefore the more roads it had to get stuff out, the fewer roads it had by 2010, the less infrastructure it had in 2010. It's a very direct, correlation between how much you were colonised and how rich you are now, or rather, inverse correlation between how much you colonised and how rich you are now.
Oh, interesting. So we've got this position, and some of the people in London are fantasizing about what might happen, but we do have a hard reality coming up about whether another independence referendum will happen or not, or at least it will happen, but how will it happen? What's your thoughts on it at the moment?
I think it's only fools who make predictions in the modern world. My sense is that, firstly, Theresa May has said that she won't allow a referendum then. She hasn't said she'd ban one entirely yet, as far as I know. And so that leaves her wiggle room in a way that Nicola Sturgeon hasn't left wiggle room. Nicola Sturgeon said, there will be a referendum. Theresa May has said not until after we've left the EU, basically. And I think that, this is a big fight, because if the UK insists on Scotland being taken out of the EU before allowing us, and it is still their constitutional right to allow us, whether it should be or not, before allowing us a second independence referendum, then that means, A, that it's much harder to win the rights of Europeans who live here to vote, who could vote last time in the referendum. And also, for those of us who support independence, obviously they're likely to be a demographic that's likely to swing towards independence if that means joining the EU. And also it'll make negotiations around getting back into the EU probably somewhat harder. People, I think, make the mistake of reading the laws of the EU as though they're the laws of physics rather than the laws of women and men. They are the laws of women and men, and they can be changed by women and men. But but it would be harder, certainly, if we get taken out of the EU first and then voted to be independent to get back in. It would take more time and more negotiation and so on, and we'd already suffered some of the consequences of that. So, will the referendum happen before or after taking out the EU? I think we're yet to see. I don't want to make strong predictions. I think, as I say, anyone who kind of is certain about what will happen next would be foolish. But I think that, if neither side blinks, and this is just a battle of wills between Theresa May and Nicola Sturgeon, then that'll be interesting to see who comes out on top.
And is it a cast iron guarantee that the Greens are going to back the proposals for a referendum?
Yeah, they've said they will. The vote's on Tuesday. There's no real doubt, I don't think, about that. All the MSPs have been very clear. They spoke in the chamber about why they were backing it. The last Scottish Green Party conference called for a Section 30 order to call for a second referendum. At its conference, the party has the MSPs have a mandate from their members behind them saying to vote for it. And also, there's been a lot of absurdity around this too. The Tories and Labour have been attacking Green MSPs because they say that the Green manifesto said they wouldn't vote for another referendum unless, there was public support for it, which, is not what the manifesto said exactly. It didn't rule out voting for a referendum in any context. And, it was quite careful in not saying that. It just suggested some context in which it might vote for a referendum. But it's been very, entertaining to see Tories, of all people, trying to attack Greens for apparently breaking a commitment that wasn't actually in their manifesto. Yeah, I mean, Greens will, yes, vote for this. They said they will. There's not been any dissent from any of the MSPs. They're all. I don't think there's a question there really.
Well, Tories will be Tories. Apparently, one of them came out this week and said Tories MPs' expenses shouldn't be monitored in such a controlled way because it's a terrorism risk. But the Tories will be Tories. But what's interesting in the Scottish context at the moment is that also Labour will be Tories. We've got the council elections coming up. We've seen actual Labour candidates encouraging people to vote Tory. I mean, this is quite bizarre. I think the Labour leadership is very different from maybe normal Labour voters on this as well. But I mean, what do you think is going on? Are they trying to present a united unionist front, or is it just the usual kill the SNP stuff?
No, I think that it's more than that. I think that it's kind of, as you said before, the two different, I mean, there's more than two parts, but the two main different groups within the Labour Party hate each other so much now that those on the right would, I can well imagine, vote Tory ahead of those on the left, rather than voting for those on the left. It's important to remember that Labour is often its own little world, and it's often its own little thing. And for a long time, there was enough reach of that world into the world of people of Scotland that, that played out and had some impact nationally. But what's happened in the last few years is that has become detached. So you've got this small group of people fighting the same old fights with each other and internally and over stuff which, unless you're involved in it, you can often barely understand. Well, no one is paying attention to it anymore. This used to be, think about the TBGBs, as they're called, the Tony Blair, Gordon Brown wars across the UK, but also you had, similar kind of disputes within, East and West in Glasgow, in Labour and so on. And, and often those battles are going on internally, and to be honest, no one's paying attention or really cares apart from those involved in them anymore. And so I suppose what I'm saying is I wouldn't try and read internal battles in the Scottish Labour Party too much to national politics. It might well just be two people who've fallen out 30 years ago and never made up. But of course, the other thing, the dynamic for Scottish Labour is also interesting because, they understand that, all the people who voted for them in 2010, about 30-40% voted yes last time, and maybe even more might be considering voting yes next time. The Tories are working very hard to polarise politics around the union and to try and eat up the Scottish Labour vote. The SNP have done a very good job of eating the rest of it, and of course although we've not seen much evidence of it in Scotland yet, in England there is a slight resurgence of the Lib Dems, and you can kind of imagine that kind of, the Edinburgh South middle class voter who voted Lib Dem in 2010 and then Labour in 2015 and got them their one seat. You can absolutely imagine them going back to Lib Dems in 2020, 2021. And so they're being pulled apart from all sides, and it's very hard to know if you're the leader which side to protect against. What Labour is used to is a two-party system where you triangulate in order to stop an attack from the Tories. You move to the right, and that's what kind of the current generation of Labour politicians is used to. What we have in Scotland is like 5-6 dimensional chess, where you can't just move to the right to stop Tories attacking you for being too left wing, because then you get attacked from the left by the Greens, and you can't be less unionist in order to stop the SNP stealing your votes, because then Tories take your votes. And the problem is, in a sense, lack of very clear principles. It's not having a party built around a clear sense of here's what we think and here's where we're going to take the country. And I think when you do have that, people begin to respect you. But even when they've tried that, so Labour did run to the left in the 2016 election in Scotland. Everyone quite rightly said, yeah, but we remember all you same people saying right-wing things only 2 years ago. So we know you don't believe any of this. So even if, I felt like Scottish Labour said lots of things that, I agree with and a lot of people agree with in the 2016 election, not about the union, but about a whole load of other stuff. But I know the people involved, and I know they didn't think that 2 years ago, so why would I trust them to actually do it?
Yeah, actually standing for something might help them out a bit there. So what do you think?
You can't fake that.
No. So the thing they have been wheeling out recently, and the Liberals as well, is the old one, the Federal Britain. Here we go again. Are you convinced?
For me, there's two important arguments against federalism in Britain. The first is that in order for it to happen, you need to persuade the English. And even English constitutional geeks don't talk about federalism. Even the kinds of people who really follow politics closely What they talk about is PR, and at the moment the EU, and so on. Perhaps a written constitution, but very rarely are they talking about English parliaments or not and federalism. It's not, it's not even really on the agenda, even among people who care about this stuff, never mind the public as a whole. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is that federalism within the UK is not a solution to the problem we have before us. The kind of difference between Devo Max and independence, the one thing you can't devolve is foreign policy. And so, Labour are trying to wheel out their old lines around, they feel like help win the last referendum, around federalism, around, we'll devolve even more, so you'll give even more autonomy, but you can still stay in the UK. But staying in the UK means ultimately one thing. It means the UK sets your foreign policy, it decides your international relationships. And that means, given the UK has not been willing to even think about any kind of more complex arrangement around what I want to call the reverse Greenland, that means Scotland being taken out of the EU against its will. And while I don't think that's the kind of main motivator for most of the public, I think that it is important, and we should be against that. And, no federal solution will fix that core problem. That is a problem of foreign policy. That is about the main foreign policy, one of the two main foreign policies of the UK for the last 40 years, which is that we are in the EU, has changed, and Scotland voted against that. And that is a huge change, and federalism does nothing at all to fix it.
And just on the last question, so we don't know exactly when the referendum is going to come or how it's going to come, but probably it is going to come. And in one way the campaign never stopped, but in another way it's sooner or later it's going to have to begin in earnest again. Do you have any ideas on how you think we should conduct the campaign this time?
Oh, that's a huge question. I mean, there's a whole load of things to say, aren't there? I think the kind of first thing is that we need not to be obsessed by the EU. People don't care as much about the EU as sort of political obsessives do. And if you go and knock on their door, obviously some do, but lots don't. And we need to make the narrative about much more than that. We can't allow the Tories to cast themselves as anti-establishment in Scotland. They'll try and do this, the SNP establishment is trying to force another referendum on the people who don't want it. We the people don't want it. And we need to work very hard to show the Tories, or rather show people who the Tories are and what they are. And of course the media won't do that. There's this sort of mythology that there's no such, that everyone in Scotland hates the Tories. And it's worth remembering that a big percentage of the electorate now grew up post-Thatcher. And while they kind of learned from their parents not to like the Tories, they also understand that context changes and people, things do change, as we've seen very rapidly. And so we shouldn't write off the Tories from the outset. We need to see them as serious opponents who we need to beat, and we need to think about what that means. And we need to hold them to account, take them seriously. Why don't they have any policies on anything apart from the union? Why do they refuse to ever answer questions about anything apart from the union, for example?
Why is what Ruth Davidson says this month always sort of completely opposite to what she said last month?
Yeah, and why don't the media hold her to account for that? Having said that, and that was in a way quite harsh language, there is a truth in the fact that we need to be courteous and to listen to people's concerns and understand them. That lots of people who voted no last time did so out of fear. Lots of people who voted yes this time might not necessarily vote yes again. As last time, we need to build a sense of hope and a sense of social movement. It can't be led from the top, it needs to be bottom up. If you think that back to the last campaign, it started off as a sort of nothing will change very much, announced it from a stage with a line of businessmen, it'll all be okay, it's just a slight shuffling around of constitutional arrangements, and polling stayed at 30% support. And then towards the end, when it became, when Rick had those massive conferences and the SNP moved the messaging to the left and so on, and it became that's when the vote started to surge. It gave people the sense that things could be different if you vote yes. And so we need to win the case for independence based on change, and win the case for change, which is fine because there's a very good, strong case for change. People's incomes have collapsed in the last 10 years, etc.
I'm sorry, but that's the thing. It's quite hard to position because with the exit from the EU, even if you're suggesting it might not be the best idea to campaign on that, a no vote this time would represent a massive amount of change as well. It's just that it's difficult to transmit that to voters because people haven't begun to see the ramifications of all of this yet.
Well, so for me, the point in a way was made very well by David Jameson, who talks about basket case Britain. And the point is, the EU is not, if you make it about the EU as a principle, then I think it's a bad idea. But the EU is an example of the fact that Britain is becoming a basket case. that Britain doesn't have any solutions to the problems of the modern world.